What's up, everybody? Shenandoah Valley Reefer here. Today on the Waterbox 230.6, I'm going to be installing a Red Sea ReefMat 1200. I just wanted to show everybody the things that I use to plumb it in, what gave me a hard time and what, came pretty easily. Like I mentioned before, I never really found a video on YouTube that specifically pertained to installing the Red Sea ReefMat 1200 on a Waterbox 230.6. So that's why I made this content, and I'm hoping it helps a lot of people out. And so let's just dive right into it. So here are the fittings that I got to hard plumb in the ReefMat 1200 to my Waterbox 230.6. I have 6 1-inch 90s, 2 couplers that go from 1.25 to 1 inch. I have 2 1-inch unions, and then I have the unions that adapt the 40 millimeter to 1.25 inch. And then I have 2 4-foot pieces of 1-inch PVC and 1 piece of 1.25 inch PVC. Now this is Schedule 80 stuff. You don't have to use Schedule 80. I just use the Schedule 80 because I think it looks better being gray versus being white. And then the glue and primer cleaner that I have is just the regular stuff you can get at a home improvement store. Now I have the clear cleaner, clear primer, the all-purpose cement, and then the heavy-duty clear PVC cement. I do not know if I'm going to need the all-purpose cement because I'm not entirely sure what the drains coming off the water box are. From what I could read, it said it was PVC or UPVC, but I do know it's very thin. So I got that just in case. I'm probably do a test to see how the drain reacts because I have a little scrap piece. And but when you are gluing the Schedule 80, you definitely want to use the heavy duty PVC cement. So hopefully it all goes according to plan and looks good and I don't make any mistakes gluing it up. So right here I used a paper plate around the drain to catch any shavings that came off that drain piece when I was either using the PVC cutters or the hacksaw. I actually ended up not using the PVC cutters because I could hear like some creaking and cracking when I began to bite down on it. So I ended up just taking the PVC cutter off and I just used a hacksaw and it cut really, really well with the hacksaw. Right here I realized some of the shavings were actually getting into the sump and I didn't want those plastic shavings to make it back up to the display. So I just grabbed a towel to clean it up a little bit. So what I did right here is I added a couple more paper plates at the bottom of the drain, that coupler right there. So I slid that piece of PVC out of that coupler and I used it to trace a circle on the paper plate so I could get the diameter of the drain. And then I cut that hole out on the paper plate and slid it around the drain to kind of use it as a catch pan to keep, everything clean and to catch as many shavings as possible. And then I just resumed with the hacksaw. So once I got it cut, I just slid everything out really, really carefully, just trying to prevent as getting many of those shavings in the sump as possible. Ended up getting a little bit, but it was super easy to clean up. Right here I just took a dry towel and I cleaned all the feathers off the drain I just cut. That way my gluing surface was clean so I could get the best possible leak-free bond. So before I glue this union on there, I'm just doing a dry fit to make sure that it's sitting where I need it to sit. It is sitting right against the gate valve coming off the main drain, and the clearances for the main drain and emergency drain are going to be really tight. So it's very crucial to make sure that this union is sitting where I need it to sit before I glue it. So right here I'm gluing half of the union on. I've actually taken the union apart and removed the O-ring just to make sure that none of the glue gets where the O-ring sits and glues the O-ring to the union. And then I'm going to hold it firmly in place for 20 or 30 seconds to ensure it doesn't slide down out of position. Then I'm just taking a paper towel and wiping off the excess glue, making sure it's not getting in the threads or where the O-ring sits. That way when you put everything back together, it goes together good and you have a firm connection. I also was using a paper plate and a piece of plywood just to keep any drips from the glue from getting inside the sump, because you definitely don't want to get that stuff in your sump. So what I did right here is I took the level and just got a mark right there so I know where to start the next union. And I'm going to cut it here because it's going to slide in about an inch, inch and an eighth. Because you can't have the two unions side by side because they are too fat. So this should work out to where they're about like that, staggered. Now it'll be tight getting all the PVC in there, but I'm pretty sure it's going to work out just barely perfect. So this is actually where I made my first mistake. I shouldn't have cut that emergency drain so low. I should have cut it up higher, actually above the gate valve that's on the main drain. But luckily I cut it too low and not too high, so I was able to reorder another union and fix this a couple days later. I almost edited this part out, but I wanted to show you guys the mistake that I made in hopes that it prevents you from making the same mistake. So right here I'm going to do my dry fit on the emergency drain, and I'm still totally oblivious to the fact that I actually cut this, too low. But I do end up correcting it later in the video. And like I said, I didn't edit this out. That way, you guys could see what I did and it would prevent you from making the same mistake. It took me a little while to actually figure out that I made this mistake. And if I would have thought about it a little bit better, I probably wouldn't have wasted that union and wouldn't have had to wait a couple of days for the other one to come in the mail. But I guess, you live and learn, and hindsight is 20/20. So I'm gluing on half the union to the emergency drain right here, still oblivious to the fact that I've made my mistake. I even take the board out, step back and look at it and think to myself, man, it looks really good. Right here I'm just measuring how far the PVC is going to insert into the fittings, and I'm going to take a towel and I'm going to wipe the PVC pipe off. That way everything's clean when I'm trying to glue it. And then I'm going to cut a little short piece right here, about I think it's 1 3/4 to 2 inches, just so when I join that coupler and that 90 together, they're joined together tightly, because room is tight and I don't want to have any wasted space. So all the PVC that I'm going to be working with right here is 1 inch, because the bottom side of that coupler is 1 inch, and so is that 90. The top side of that coupler is 1 1/4 inch, and we'll get to that later. Again, right here I'm doing my dry fit just to make sure I got everything the right length and not too long, because I don't want to have to keep cutting and re-gluing, and I didn't buy extra fittings, so I really don't want to make a mistake. So I'm cleaning all these fittings and the PVC before I make the connection, and after I get it cleaned I put the primer on there, let it dry for a second, and then I go ahead and hit my glue on both sides, the PVC and the fitting that I'm sliding it into. Right here is when I put my glue on there. I get both sides glued like I said, and then I hold it firmly against that piece of plywood for 20 or 30 seconds just to keep it from sliding out of position. Once it's in position, I take, this time, a wet paper towel and just wipe off the excess glue. I'm going to do the same thing here on the other end of this fitting. I'm going to clean everything and prime everything, let it dry for a second, then go ahead and put my glue on there and then hold it down on the board or squeeze it together for 20 or 30 seconds, and then just wipe off that excess glue to keep everything, neat and clean looking. Right here I'm actually, sticking the paper towel down inside that fitting that I just made to try to get the excess glue, and the plastic kind of melts as you're gluing this stuff together, and I want to get that stuff out of here too. That way I can have as much flow as possible. So right here I'm going to cut the other small piece of PVC that I'm going to use to insert inside this fitting that I'm making. And again, I'm going to hold this 90 and the coupler tight together like I did the other one. So essentially I made two of the same exact fitting. I'm still using 1 inch PVC because the 90 is 1 inch, and so is the bottom side of that coupler. So here I'm going to clean and then prime the little piece of PVC pipe I cut in that 90, and then I'm going to let it dry for a second and then glue it. Again, I'm gluing both pieces. I'm gluing that 90 and I'm gluing that piece of PVC that slides into the 90. I'm probably using too much glue, but I want to ensure that I have a nice, good fit and I can wipe off any excess glue. After I get it glued, I'm going to hold it down firmly against that piece of plywood for 20 or 30 seconds and just wipe off any excess. That way it's a nice clean fit. Here I'm going to clean and then prime that little piece of PVC coming off the 90 and the coupler. After that I'm going to glue it, and then I'm going to hold it firmly on that piece of plywood for 20 or 30 seconds and wipe off any excess glue. I'm going to glue both sides, that little piece of PVC coming out of the 90, and I'm going to glue the coupler. That way I have a nice tight fit. Again, like I've said numerous times, any excess glue I can just wipe off. So I've made two of the exact same pieces, and these pieces are going to sit on the drains. One's for the emergency drain and one's for the main drain. Now I used unions to convert from metric to standard, and the reason I did that versus using a coupler to convert from metric to standard is the union I can rotate that fitting around to the exact placement that I need. So at this point, I've pretty much got it figured out where I want this main drain line to sit. So I'm holding the piece that I just made in place, and I'm taking a measurement to see how long of a piece I need to cut. Once I get that measured, I'm going to add probably 1 3/4 to 2 inches to it. That way I can account for how much the PVC is going to slide into the union in the piece that I just made. So the piece I'm going to be cutting now is going to be the 1 1/4 PVC, because it's going to go from the bottom of the union to the top of that coupler and 90 piece that I just made. The union is what converts the main drain from metric to standard. So as I'm getting ready to do this dry fit on my main drain, I'm beginning to realize that I cut the emergency drain too long, and I've already got the union glued on the emergency drain. So I'm realizing that I'm going to have to order another metric to standard union, but I can't keep the aquarium down for days while I'm waiting for this new union to arrive. So I was able to figure something out to get everything back up and running temporarily, and I'll show you guys what I did later in the video. So right here I'm going to take that piece of 1 1/4 PVC that I measured earlier in the video that comes out of the bottom side of the metric to standard union, and I'm going to glue it to the top side of this coupler that goes down to that 1" 90. But this is where I made my second mistake, and I'll get into that second mistake a little bit more later, but I would have had to make this connection anyways, because I'm having to get the aquarium back up and running for today, because it's not going to be able to be down for a couple days while I'm waiting on these 2 new unions to come in. So I correct this later in the video, but at this point I didn't realize that I was making that mistake. And pretty much what it was is, once I get this all glued up to the bottom side of the union on that main drain, later on I realized that I've also made that drain too long. I'm just wiping off excess glue right here, making sure everything's nice and tight, and then I'm going to take that ring, the tightening ring that tightens the union together, and I'm going to slide it thread side facing up over this piece. That's important because if you don't slide that piece on prior to gluing the bottom side of the union, you're not going to be able to get it on. I'm cleaning, priming, and gluing the bottom side of this metric to standard union to this piece that I've made. Still totally oblivious to the fact that I've actually made a mistake. But like I said, I would have had to make these connections anyways because the aquarium had to get back up and running for the day. So I'm going to go ahead and get this piece screwed onto the bottom side of the union and go ahead and grab my tape measure and get a measurement for how long of a piece I'm going to need from the bottom side of that 90 over to pretty close to where I think that ReefMat is going to sit. I leave it a little bit long, that way I have some wiggle room, and I can always take some off, but I can't add any back on. Here I'm using 1" PVC because the bottom side of that 90 over to the inlet hole for the ReefMat is 1", and I've decided how long I need this piece of PVC to be, so I'm going to measure it and cut it to length. Now that I've got this piece of 1" PVC cut, I'm going to go ahead and stick it in the bottom side of that 90, look at it, take some measurements, and just make sure that it's sitting where I want it to sit and that everything looks like it's supposed to look. Any adjustments that I need to make, if it's too long, I can easily just cut it off with the PVC cutter. I've decided that I like the way this main drain looks, so now I'm going to pull it back out and I'm going to figure out exactly where I want to put my union that I'm going to put in that long run. And the reason I added a union was so if I needed to take it apart easily or do something for cleaning, or if I needed to rotate, the 90s around or something like that to get in a better position, I was easily able to do that. So now that I know where I want my union, I'm going to take my tape measure and put a mark on the pipe about halfway and cut it, and then in a few minutes I'm going to glue on the unions. So before I glue on the union, I'm going to go ahead and clean, prime, and glue up this section of the main drain because I know the length that I want and where I want it to sit. And once I get this glued up and get the excess glue wiped off of it, I'm going to then slip on the union and just do another dry fit to double check that everything is sitting how I like it. So now I've got this piece glued up like I was saying, and I've got the union slid back on. So I'm just going to do my dry fit here, look at it for a second, and make sure everything's still looking good and how I want it to look. So I like what I see, and everything is fitting how I want it to fit. So I'm going to go ahead and clean, prime, and glue on the union, and make sure that before you glue the union on, that if you want the threaded piece of the union to be on this side, that you go ahead and get it slipped on. Because if you glue that up prior to sliding on that tightening part or threaded part of the union, you're not going to be able to get it back on, and then you're just going to have to cut the pipe, and you essentially wasted a union. So now I'm going to glue on the other half of the union to the piece of pipe that I was cutting earlier, and I always leave the gaskets off the union while I'm doing this, just to make sure that the gasket's not actually getting glued to the union. And I always make sure that I clean the surface where the union marries together, just to make sure it's a nice flat and clean surface and there's no glue or anything on it that may cause a leak down the road. So now that I've got the majority of my main drain glued together, I'm going to grab 4 1-inch 90s, and I'm going to grab a little short piece of 1-inch PVC pipe, and I'm going to take that PVC pipe and I'm going to cut 2 small pieces, about 1 3/4 inches to 2 inches long. That way they slip into the 90s all the way. And then I'm going to take 2 90s and glue them together 2 times. So essentially you're going to make 2 different fittings with those 4 90s. And the way my sump is set up, my main drains are flowing towards the left. But I want the main drain and the emergency drain to follow tightly against the cabinet. So I've got to get that drain moved towards the front of the cabinet. And that's what I'm doing with these 90s. So these 90s are going to be glued together, but essentially facing different directions. So the first 90 that comes off the long run of the main drain and emergency drain is going to aim towards the front of the cabinet. And then the 90 that's glued to the 90 facing the front of the cabinet is going to turn the drain back down. And then the ReefMat comes with some black flexible rib tubing. I'm going to use that to make the final connection up to the ReefMat because it's a little bendy and it would be hard to hard plumb that. So now that I've got that fitting glued up, I'm going to go ahead and glue it to my main drain because I am 100% sure that this fitting that I made is going to work for me. And then once I get it glued onto that main drain, I'm going to go ahead and do another dry fit just to make sure, it's sitting where I want it to sit. So I'm satisfied with how the dry fit's looking. So I'm going to go ahead and take this main drain back off and figure out how I'm going to make my final connection point to the ReefMat using that black flexible ribbed tubing. I have a measurement for what I think the drain needs to drop down. So I've cut that piece of PVC. I think it was like 3 or 4 inches long. And I'm going to glue that into the bottom side of the 90 right here. And then the other side of that piece of PVC, I'm going to use that half union that they send with the ReefMat to make the connection from the hard plumb main drain to the ReefMat with that black flexible ribbed tubing. So before I glue this half union up to this main drain right here, I'm just doing one more dry fit to make sure everything's fitting like it's supposed to fit, because I don't want to glue this on the wrong place or the wrong way, because they only send you one, so you only get one shot. And that black half union that comes with the ReefMat is PVC, so you can use PVC glue to glue it to your hard plumbing. Remember to slide the threaded piece of that half union on the pipe prior to gluing on that half union. When I was gluing on this half union, I was very careful not to get any glue in the threads, because I didn't want to have problems tightening this union up in the future, and just wanted the best seal possible. Right here, I'm just taking some Goo Gone and peeling the stickers off the union, because I just like everything to look clean and crisp, and I'm just using that Goo Gone to get any of the sticky residue off that union. So I put the ReefMat in the sump, and I've mocked up the main drain, and this is when I realize that I've actually made the emergency drain too long. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that union off, and I'm going to use the black flexible ribbed tubing that came with the ReefMat as my temporary emergency drain while I'm waiting on the new union to arrive. And I'm still oblivious to the fact that I've got the main drain cut too long, but I figure that out later in the video when I'm trying to correct and hard plumb in the emergency drain. But I'm able to get them both fixed, as you'll see later in the video. It actually ended up working out really, really well and looked really, really good. I'm going to use that little black coupler that comes with the ReefMat that threads into the black flexible tubing to make the connection to the emergency drain while I'm using this black flexible tubing as my temporary emergency drain. The aquarium's been running for several days, and I've also figured out that the main drain is too long, so I had to order that half union piece from Red Sea, because I have to cut this one off to, get everything shorter. So what I did is I just left enough of that PVC pipe that's coming off that 90 that's aimed down to where it could just slide into that union and have a nice tight snug fit against that 90 that's turned down. So now that I've got that replacement half union glued on, I'm measuring the main drain to see how long the distance is between the gate valve and that union, because the union that I'm putting on the emergency drain, I want to have it offset from the main drain. That way they're much easier to tighten and loosen if I need to get them off to clean. Now that I've got that piece of PVC cut for the emergency drain, I'm going to go ahead and glue it onto that 90 coupler combo piece that I made towards the beginning of the video. I'm going to take my hacksaw and get this emergency drain cut in the correct place. Right here I'm using 1.25" PVC, and I've got my measurement for how far I need to bring down this emergency drain before it hits that 90 coupler piece. And then after I get it cut, before I glue it, I'm going to do a dry fit with the union on there just to make sure that all the clearances are lining up how I like it, because like I've said a couple times, it is a really tight fit. So I'm liking the way the dry fit looks. So right here I'm just going to go ahead and get everything clean, primed, and glued up. I've got everything glued up, so I'm going to do another dry fit and just make sure I like the way it looks still, and then decide the placement for this union that's going to be on the long run of the emergency drain. I like my placement here for this union for this long run on the emergency drain, so I'm going to go ahead and clean, prime, and get this glued up. Now I'm going to do a dry fit with both drains just to ensure that the clearances are working out, and I like the way it looks. I like the way everything's fitting, so I'm going to go ahead and clean, prime, and glue these final few pieces. Everything glued up and looks really good.
This last little piece on the emergency drain, I'm actually not going to glue it so I can take it out if I need to remove the reef mat. This is where I use that black flexible rib tubing that actually comes with the reef mat, because the bend from those 90s to the inlet on that reef mat would be really hard to get it, hard plumbed in. So this was definitely the easiest option, and it worked out really well. So I use the legs when I set this reef mat up, and I set the reef mat on top of some white egg crate, or light diffuser as the local home improvement store calls it. It's really the same thing. Just, made this stand, cut what I needed, zip tied it together and set it, in the filter chamber, and everything looked pretty good. I did that because I wanted to get the reef mat as high out of the water as I could, because what that does is that creates more head pressure on the actual fleece inside the reef mat, and with that higher head pressure, it makes the fleece last a lot longer. I've gotten an average of 7 to 8 weeks out of every mat that I've used so far. Thanks everyone for watching this video. Some of the parts of the video may seem crude or rough, but all I have is my cell phone to record this content, because I'm not sponsored by any brand or manufacturer or anything like that. I just do this stuff because I enjoy it, and I've made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot of things the hard way. So any chance that I have to share with someone my experiences, I want to be able to do that. That's the main point of this channel. Thanks again for watching.